So where you are now is where you're sitting on the recording. If you come back, and on that note, welcome one and all to another Tinbox meetup. I'm sitting hold the fort today. Mark may have to drop off, internet problems and various. Michael, who's normally with us, is doing something anyway, unable to be with us. He said, looking around the room, I think we're a fairly familiar crowd. So I suppose the question goes out to the floor. Does anyone have a issue they'd like to raise? Paul, far away.
I don't know if this is too complicated to do in this kind of a meetup, but I have struggled with trying to understand and replicate posters in the Tinderbox posters lesson document that I think Mark Bernstein, you distributed a while back, and it's got all kinds of examples. It's just that the getting from A to B for me isn't intuitive. If we have time, I would love to just see a Plotly scatter chart from blank Tinderbox to poster demonstration, so I could then replicate those steps.
Yeah, it sounds so. Mark might ever do that. One thing I would say in terms of sort of breaking it down, one easy way, and this sort of came up in a question someone asked in the forum about sort of templates, which is often a good way to start, is just start with the HTML of the thing you want to create. So go and make something in Plotly, save that page, because essentially what you're going to do is take everything that's in that page and replace bits of it with export code, or export code. Even if the export code is using some action code to call stuff. And it's, dare I say, it is that simple. So in the outline, it's that simple. Obviously, the execution involves, it all gets a bit labyrinthine. But so essentially what you're doing is you are showing a web page internally inside Tinderbox, all or some of which may come from be stored in Tinderbox notes, or you may be pulling some of it from the web. Obviously, if you're in a place without very good internet, you might probably want to do it locally. But the thing is, using this deconstruction approach, you can experiment quite easily. You say, well, I'll just see if I can change cell B1, in the plot. Find where B1's thing is and put sort of value of some cell. And if the value turns up, you're on your way to this whole deconstructive process. I make that simply because I think that hopefully can make it a bit less scary. Because when you look at it, you're thinking, well, where do I start? And the answer is there are many ways. And Mark, I think, will probably show us, walk us through something. But the thing is that probably the scariest thing to do, unless you're frightfully expert, is to start with a blank page, because that really is trying to build the whole thing from the ground up. So sometimes reverse engineering can help. Before cycling back to that, are there any other things to put on the bill of fare for today? Deathly silence. Right. Well, Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, I can do
Fire
that.
away, sir.
Okay, let's Plotly. We want, and I can share my screen. Let's do the whole desktop in case that's useful. Okay, let's start with this one. I'm going to not go all the way in. I'll just go part of the way, and if we need to get the rest, we'll pick that up subsequently. So let's start with a simple line plot here. First, how are we exporting? You're exporting using a template called T_Plotly. Let's go look at this template. Here it is. Okay. There's the head, and here is the body. Okay. This just says we're going to be using UTF-8. It's now a standard ritual incantation. You'll use it in basically all your documents. we've got a style sheet that I'm loading from somewhere that sets some standard styles and adds a background color of white. I include this line, in fact, these two lines, which are just copied from the Plotly site, which says, you want to use Plotly? Use these two lines, and then gives alternatives if for some reason you can't, but just use the two lines they say to do, and these load the Plotly library into your page.
Sorry, is it just me? I don't see your screen.
Oh,
No,
Oh.
it may be behind something else, depending on how many screens you are fortunate or unfortunate enough to be working on.
Okay, sorry, I'll keep quiet. I'll find it. Okay.
I'm going to focus the share a little bit more tightly because that might help. There we go. So now you should see the thing in itself.
It's probably useful,
Okay.
Mark, it's probably useful to point out for Paul that you've helpfully here, all the stuff that's in orange is Tinderbox doing something, and everything that's in black is effectively just plain text.
This is boilerplate that's being copied to your page. So I'm going to go back here to the map. And find my poster again. Here we are. Now, I'm going to simplify this a little bit. Okay. Here's the part that we're inserting. This is the part that says draw a graph here. And in fact, rather than do that, I'm going to take this, copy it, and go over here and paste it. So we've got our own copy. And for the X values, I'm going to add a JSON list, which is like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And I'm going to have another JSON list here. And now you see my X values are taken from this list. My Y values are taken from this list. If I change this and redraw, I get a different line. Okay.
Yep.
The thing to note is that in JSON, a list looks a lot like lists look like in Tinderbox, but not quite. The elements are separated by commas instead of semicolons. Similarly, in a JSON dictionary, this entire thing is a JSON dictionary. Curly brackets, keys, which should be but don't need to be enclosed in quotes because they're always strings, and values which can be any JSON object separated by commas. Okay, not semicolons, commas. Know which world you're in because they look so much alike, and yet semicolons will confuse the web browser no end. So don't do that. Now, I've got some tinderbox lists up here that have the X and Y values I want. And I move those in by saying, call the function JSON list on poster X. Let's go look at the function JSON list. That's this one here. Okay, we have a string, which is the result. We go through each element in the list. If we have a result, we add a comma after it, and then we add the list element. Then we enclose the whole thing in square brackets and we're done. I mean, what could be easier? Okay. Finally, we've got this thing called style. Okay, this determines things like what's the title and what kind of grid lines do I want? How do I want the axes? And this is another JSON dictionary. But typically you don't want, we could have that in an attribute, but instead I just type this. Let's improve the formatting just a little bit. I just type this in the text of another note. And in this style, we say make a local variable style. This, for style points, we could say this is going to be a string of called style. That's the value of the text of my style. And again, here, when we render this, we say, Dear Tinderbox, could you get into a local variable my style the result of this function call? That function call says, look at every link that's coming from this note. If the name of the source of that link contains the argument passed to the string, then the result is the ID. This should probably be ID string, but ID will do, and return it. So this gives us the ID of the note that contains the string that we passed. So when we called, I have I fouled this up, but we will find out why. Okay, when things go wrong in a poster, we want to show the text pane selector and we want to look at what we're exporting. Okay, this is okay.
Sorry, does it actually over at on the var string style, does it have to be value text style one instead of my style, like the end of that line? Or it's a capital S?
Yeah.
Oh no, not capital.
No, that should be okay. And
I don't see where my style is located as a note.
it's
Oh, it's created. Okay, got it.
okay. Just
Oh, wait a minute. Mark, you're in my style is calling, isn't it? I know there's apologies. No, it's calling the ID, isn't it, of the next style one. So when you go for text, yes, that's text of the ID of the value my style on the
yeah.
right.
Okay. I'm just going to find out what the value of my style here is. I look at export, and that looks like a reasonable ID. Okay, so that's okay so far. Now we're going to see how my style is. I want to find out about style. That's I'm going to give this a unique name.
On your original, you need to change that style to line two, in the action. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Or something is wrong with this line, and we are going to find out by looking at the authentic sample. Which looks exactly like
Is there a semicolon missing at the end of the value style?
No, we don't need a semicolon. Um,
Is there a caret missing?
carets here, carets here. This has both carets. Thank you, Mark Anderson. Style 2.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's not a requirement to have a closing caret on an export code. Some of us do it as a trope to remind us, basically to remind ourselves when it finishes. Tinderbox will generally put, well, 99, unless you give it something really gnarly, will parse out the end of the export code for you. So it's not a requirement, but it can be helpful.
Okay.
If you take out the commented line, because does it matter? It's got a different number of exclamation points front and back. The value style one.
No, that's just text, so I can see it when I export.
So it's not getting style. It's not getting populated.
Yeah. I am going to go and change my screen share and go back even a level further. And we're going to go to plotly.com. We're going to docs on the graphing libraries. We are going to share again. Okay, Plotly JavaScript, open source graphing library, and we're going to go to basic line charts. And here it's got the example of a basic line plot. Okay, this looks easy enough. I'm going to copy this. Goodbye. I'm going to make a note and we'll call it Meetup, and I'm going to make it some size. I'm going to adopt the poster prototype, which mostly just gives me some nice bits. And I am going to use the Plotly template. Which we've already looked at. And sorry. I don't want to use the export template. I'm not exporting. I want to set the poster template. And I don't want to be here. I want to be down here. Where is the meetup? Okay. Now we are going to just take what should be working. And this is desperate times. I've only gotten this desperate a couple of times in the past, but it happens. I'm going to save this. Meetup.html. I'm going to open my browser window. I'm going to open meetup.html on my desktop. And I am going to ask it to debug. Okay. DOM with my div.
Oh, yeah, the HTML hasn't got an element in which to draw the chart. If you go back to the text, sorry,
Yeah.
What
if
it
I
is,
go back to Meetup.
Yeah, the template is probably missing the expected element in which the chart draws. For some reason, I don't know, but that will be in the template, the tplotly template by the looks of it.
Oh, but what do we have here? We need to have a place. Plotly says, okay. And there we go. Okay, so pay attention to what's going on. But again, if things are nuts, copy the page, save it into text, open it in the web browser, and from the develop menu, which you can enable in preferences, show JavaScript console or show page source, and you will see what the problem is. Oh, that was tons of no fun, but that should get you your poster in. Yeah, we've only wasted 30 minutes with my bumbling around that. So you should have
Much
just about
appreciated.
any poster with a with a decent web doc, which is going to be almost any library. And if things go crazy, debug it in the browser. Browser has lots of tools that'll tell you what's going wrong.
No, this is valuable because you get to a certain point with Tinderbox where you want to explore, all the features there, and posters is such a rich addition that I've always said I got to use this more. So you really kind of helped me walk through a couple steps here. I mean, the basics are find the JavaScript code you need on the web, make sure you've got it in the right notes, and find a way to refer to your data appropriately. And you'll get a poster image on top of your notes. That's
right. In this case, what you could do is make a new document and copy and paste from the sample plotly, the template, the prototype, make it a prototype in the new document, and the note or note plus the linked notes that it uses. Paste all that, make sure the prototype lines up, make sure the template's got the right name, and that should work in the new document.
Yep.
There's not that much magic going on, just a little bit. Oh, and the library, the function library for those convenient functions like data note.
But also, if you're using a library such as Plotly, don't forget that if you're spinning your wheel slightly because you can't get the bit of the visualization that you want, you may well find there should be some sort of a community or forum associated with that library who will help you with what's the name of the thing that you want that perhaps you don't have at the moment. Once you have that, then you can work out how to put some information that may be in your tinderbox into it. They won't understand tinderbox, but they will be able to explain to you, especially if you give them something that isn't using any action code in it or export code in it. They'll be able to explain, the reason this is not rendering is because you haven't put this in here, or you need to add an extra line or something. So don't overlook that fact. It means stepping across different communities, but there's lots of help out there if you look around.
And the key word is render. I mean, you're basically trying to troubleshoot. If it doesn't work, how can I make this render my data? Yeah. Thank you for spending time.
Sorry, does everyone have a copy of that original file that Mark had shared when he introduced posters? Because it's such a super valuable sandbox file. I believe it's called, one second, it's called Posters for Tinderbox, I think.
Tinderbox posters.
Tinderbox posters for Meetup. Yeah.
You drop a link to that?
It was.
I'll just share it to the chat. For some reason, it's not sharing. I'll get around to it. Give me a second.
Or alternatively, oops, that's the thread for today in the forum. You could just put a link to it there, because that's probably where people will go to find it. That's the file that was being referred to.
Posting right now.
Cool.
I've got it right here. I'm just trying to make sure I've got a cleanish copy. And okay, that's good. Now, can I drop it? Yes. There it is.
The other thing is, it's got this file has got a whole lot of sort of examples in it. If you find it easier, you can always take this file, make a copy, delete all the examples,
delete everything else. Yeah,
and it seems a rather counterintuitive way to do it, but that way you should have. And if you'll notice if you deleted too much, if the poster stops working, but that'll get you back almost like a minimum working example again, which you can build out from.
Yeah, perfect.
Peter.
Okay, I have a little product. I just started it just now, literally 5 minutes ago. And what occurred to me is that I would really like to automatically generate documentation for all of the stuff that I have installed on the command line with Homebrew. So I started a new tinderbox file, and I made a stamp to run brew list and dump the list of all of my brew formulae that are into a single tinderbox file. Then I have another.
Peter?
Yeah.
Tell us what Homebrew is.
Okay, Homebrew is a package manager for the Mac terminal, and it has tons of tools, and it also lets you install regular desktop apps with it. It has a section, I call them casks. And if you have a regular Mac program, it can be stored in the Homebrew package manager as a cask, and then it will download the application, keep it up to date, and maintain it in your application folder for you. And there are lots of really great utilities that are available that way. So what I wanted to do was to automate pulling in the documentation. The homebrew command has two documentation features. One is brew list, and that gives you a list of all the formula that you currently have installed on your machine. And the other one is brew info, given the name of a formula that's on your machine. So I made another stamp for brew info, splicing in the name of the note, and that pulls in the little note listing. Let me just share my screen. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Share screen. Okay, here we go. Let me show you the stamps first. So we have our,
Got to drag it. Yeah.
okay, it's visible now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have brew list, and that sets the text of a note to run command, the actual location of the brew binary, because Tinderbox isn't finding my path from the fish shell that I'm using. So I had to explicitly tell it where brew was located on my machine. And then brew info, which does the exact same thing, only this time it's invoking the info command with the name of the note. So with those two commands, then first thing I did, let me just close this. All right, so let me just make this go away so I can show you how it started. First thing we did, yeah, I'll even empty the content now. Okay, so here's what we started with. I just made a note called brew list, and then I ran my brew list stamp. So running the stamp gives me the list of everything that I had installed with Homebrew. So then I figured, all right, the next step would be to try to get the information about each one of those commands. So then I ran explode with our standard explode on paragraphs, and that turned it into a separate note for each one of those commands. Now I took my brew info stamp, and this is the info that's generated for the note. And that's as far as I got so far. Now, what I'm really interested here is the description of what each command is, which is the second line in the output, and the home URL, which is the third line. I'd really like Tinderbox to then go and replace the content of the note with the actual home page of each one of the commands. So that'd be the next step. So the question is, the best way to pull the second line in that output and stuff it into an attribute, and then set the auto fetch URL to the URL that's on the third line. And then the other thing I was debating is manually exploding notes the way that I want to go, since I'd really like to be able to have this automatically stay up to date and not have to delete everything and rerun it. So really what I'd like is, instead of using exploding notes, would be to work off of the original list, and then for each item in the original list, automatically generate a note and flush it out with
Well,
that material.
Peter, you have got, I mean, the fact that you've created the list of notes for exploding is you have the original list. So that's how they came to be. It's the fact they're where they are in the document is simply the way you created them. So I think you've already done that. So you don't need to remake these documents, these notes, until and unless you change your
Well, that's
install.
the thing. I'm constantly adding new formula, and I'm always adding to it. So what I really want is to have it so that whenever I open up this Tinderbox document, it will then, when I'm first opening the document, pull whatever the current set of formulae that I have installed. So if there was something I had installed before that I no longer have installed, I'd like it to get rid of it. I want it to be the current documentation for what's currently installed by Brew at the moment. So I
Okay.
want getting rid of
So,
all the
so
old stuff every
to
time it
take
changes.
to take that first thing, so in other words, so your first problem is you want the list to be up to date. You want the list of packages to be the list of packages actually in use. Well, you can go and get, because you've already know how to do that, you can get the list of existing packages. You can get that list, you can compare it. If you put all, if you not necessarily in exploded notes as they are now, but if you have a container that holds all these notes that are your existing packages, you can check that list for the intersection with the current list. And if you have any things that aren't in both, those are your new notes, and you can then add them into your list of packages. So that's how you deal with that one. Um, and actually, you can do the reverse. You can look for things that need to be deleted, and Action Code has a delete function, used with caution, but it's there. So that part I don't think is there's some code to write, but it's not problematic. The next thing is essentially then you want the prototype. You want to set a prototype on all these notes, and the prototype then runs the code that goes away to find the information you want for each of these things and puts it in the right attribute. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Actually, it's really interesting because when you add your brew packages, sometimes it's such a pain in the butt to remember when you added a package. But if you just run it so that you save the date of creation, you'll know when you added that. I'm just wondering if you can do some watch folder kind of thing that tells you when you deleted a package. But
you could, because if you think about it, to delete it, you're going to have run some action code that identifies what you want to delete. So in the process of doing that, before you call the line saying, delete note whatever, you run some code that writes somewhere, I'm deleting note X on date so and so.
Oh yeah, no, sorry. To be more specific, I meant when you uninstall a brew package, if you could track that because it gets removed from your list of active packages. So that would actually mean that you run a list each time, and then you can.
There probably is. I mean, I suspect the homebrew folk would know that, or will have some magic incantation to put on the command line. I mean, which is easier is almost moot, depending on what you're more comfortable with. I also noticed that Barclay DB has a link going out from it. I'm wondering if the source of that actually has either an ampersand, a hash sign, or an @ symbol in it.
It has an app.
So I actually have that
at
up
5
on mine.
So you do you know what's causing that? Okay.
No, that's just how it's being listed.
No, if you open your document setting, if you could open your document settings and put it on the bit of the screen that we can see.
Okay, one sec. Okay, now we have that unchecked.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So
drag it onto the screen so we can see it.
Okay, can you see it now?
No.
Nope.
No.
If you put it over the window that's actually shown. It may be you're only sharing that window, so that's why we're not seeing it.
That's why.
Yeah, that's got to be it. Okay, I just unchecked the recognize found prototypes and at places and note names.
So
let me do that again now. Let me delete that, re-explode.
Excellent.
Okay.
So there's a thing to bear in mind. If you do an explode and you see a link there, it may be a telltale that you're tripping over that. And it's very easy, as you've seen, it's so easy to redo. It's not worth bothering about whether you get it right or not first time.
Now, another way to approach this is, could you select the brew list?
Yep.
We could also write a function that starts with $text dot each line sub name, and then process each name, creating a note and a designated container with that name. Perhaps testing first if that note already exists. And then, so it's that straightforward. We'll need to write a separate loop for notes that exist, but which we haven't touched. But we can do that too.
I don't know, do the command line tools, does their documentation vary? So that's the other thing to consider. You may have made a note 2 weeks ago, but if the data that you're trying to reference has changed, if your detection method is you see if you've written the note before, then you're not necessarily retesting whether the data. I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. This. The answer is you go down as far as you need to.
Yeah. Well, then we see if the last update is more recent than the last Tinderbox run or something.
Yeah.
Gee, we
It's
could
easy
probably,
enough to elaborate these, but the basic idea either built around explode, or since this explode is really quite simple, around the stream interface, should actually get you a long ways.
very nice. Maybe we could even have get rid of this formula container, a trash container, and if we drag one of those into the trash container, maybe that could automatically issue a brew uninstall command on the command line so that we could do all of our brew management inside a tinderbox.
Yes, though that's terrifying to think about.
Thanks for the help. I'll play with it, and maybe next week I'll show you what it's elaborated to.
That's great.
Okay, I'll stop sharing now.
And so that's how you can both document and maybe do your software management inside Tinderbox.
That's why I love Tinderbox so much. It's so open-ended. I can just take in any direction I need to.
Yay.
It's not there's an app for that model where it can only do one thing and I'm trapped in a straitjacket.
And for example, just to go back to the beginning, I presume that if one weren't sure that Pandora was installed on one's machine, you could use Homebrew to install Pandora, or at least tell you if it was already there in some sort of safe and reversible manner.
Yeah, it's almost
Terrific.
recursing downwards. I still remember the person I helped out who managed. We discovered they had, I think, 7 different versions of their entire user account on their Mac nested inside one another, which turned out to cause problems when you were trying to find files.
Nested, wow.
Yeah, I still to this day, esteemed professor of the arts. So he did say I'm not a great technologist, and I came in rather late in the thing, but we did at least work out what was causing the problem.
Oh, on that note, I have a massive deduplication nightmare. Now that I'm moving I got a new M4 Mac and I'm slowly trying to move all of my old typesetting stuff over. And I just realized that I have like 20 or 30 versions of my typesetting project stored on multiple media, and they all look the same. And I've got to try to figure out which is the more current of them and what I can afford to delete because it's duplicative of other stuff. I'm not sure where to go on that one.
Well, could you?
Because I have
One
just so
thought
many
is,
copies. So many copies with minor variations.
Well, data is
Suggestion.
cheap.
Yeah,
You can just save
suggestion.
everything.
Your time is worth far more than what it takes to find all those duplicates. So until AI comes along with the ultimate deduplicator, what you might consider doing is get yourself one of those really big hard drives and plug it into your computer and literally just take all the stuff that you think might be useful someday, put it over there, and then you can put that hard disk aside and know that you can get it back if you ever need it, but keep the stuff that's current. I've lived that way
Trouble
for
figuring
about
out what's the
25
most
years.
current. That's trouble though. Figuring out what the most current thing is for projects I was playing with 3 years ago.
Well, but what you do is as you're going along and you suddenly realize, oh, I want to bring up that project, you go and you do the work to figure out where you put that, and you can always put that hard drive on your system. And the cost of that storage is minimal, what these things cost these days. And you can go and look and say, oh, that's the one that I want. You pull it over your current latest Mac and put this hard drive aside, and you've got something that you're working on current. And if you later find that on that project, you say, oh, I know there was another version of this that had some other feature that I wanted. You go back, you look for it, you find that.
so
But your time spent doing something like that is far more efficient and far more effective to what you're trying to do than the time spent trying to deduplicate all that stuff.
I'm also compelled to add here that it's worth spending a little of time to look into the habit pattern that is actually causing one to generate multiple copies of the same project files in different places. Because very often it's just like, well, that's how I organize my data. And then a few months later, I change how I organize my data. Now I've got two disparate sets, and this one is moving at a different speed from this one. And so your islands are moving apart. So maybe
I know
just,
the source of that. That's the
okay.
pattern of I have it working now. I want to change something, so I better make a complete copy of it, and I'll fiddle with the copy that I made, which may or may not break it, and then trying to go back a step. So in some cases, the most recent version is the broken version that I don't want to work with, but one that was a couple earlier versions back.
Well, it
Well,
does
you
occur
could
to
use
me that if you wanted to check the typesetting, because it's a typesetting thing, so rather than look at the code that's doing it, you might just run it against basically a consistent test and then diff the outputs, because that'll tell you. And then if you've got six things that are the same and they're all the same code, well, they're dupes. If you've got six things that actually produce the same thing but don't, maybe you'd fix some edge cases and it's probably the most recent one. I mean, that's assuming you don't follow the suggestion of, as Chuck said, of just stick it on a large drive and deal with the problem if and when it arises, because it is cheaper and quicker.
I'll also point out that probably the most useful feature to me over the last, I have to say, nearly 20 years of using DevonThink is its flagging of duplicates. It doesn't, it gives me the option to convert duplicates, which is very handy. But more importantly, sometimes just nice to know that I've got a duplicate. And maybe I want that duplicate because I'm about ready to go and start playing around with a copy of it, one of the copies, and I don't want the other one to be messed up, as you were just saying, Peter. So, sometimes a tool like that is very helpful in terms of day-to-day practical maintenance of, multiple versions of things. The one thing I would suggest is that don't ever try and use any of Microsoft's versioning tools. I've never seen one that works.
The other thing I was toying with was maybe going through and appending a cryptographic hash of the file content to each of the file names, and then I'd be able to see which were the same.
And you've
Good
just
luck.
reinvented Git.
Exactly.
This is my mistake. I didn't start with Git in the first place.
Yes.
Well, you should have started with SVN, but that's neither here nor there. Git has made what SVN used to do incredibly complicated and convoluted. What was that?
And limited. We were
What
using it
was
on
that book
a game project.
you referenced, Mark, at some point? Git shit or
Oh shit, Git. I put the link in the chat.
Yes.
And the sequel, which is How Git Works, is even better and for me much more accessible. I did get started with Subversion and it frightened me. Where Peter's method, which I used for an eon, make a duplicate of everything and experiment on the duplicate, and that's effectively forking whenever you want to keep a variant or a backup. Gets the job done, but it does consume space, and that space eventually is hard to manage. Subversion, I just screwed up my repository every year or two, which is like having a fire every year or two or moving house. It keeps things clean, but it's costly. I have hope that with a little more understanding of how to get out of Git trouble, and especially the first book is specifically you're using Git to keep track of forks and branches and doing all sorts of scary things, and suddenly it has gone nuts. how do you make it sane again? That's helpful.
I didn't mean
And
to
the
disparage.
idea that you can make it sane again and that you're not doomed forever is reassuring.
Yeah, I
So
didn't mean
just
to totally
imagine,
Git. I was just referring to the fact that it has added a lot of complexity and aims at a lot of things that are not in most people's normal workflow.
Yep.
so Mark, just curious. I mean, surely you're using Git for your programming aspect of your work, but in general, do you assign all your entire work, all your data files, all your
No,
work product?
not as much as I should, and
I see.
even as much as I should is fairly conservative compared to what some people recommend. I'm trying to remember. Chuck, there was a series called something like The Programmer Apprentice, The Apprentice Programmer,
Mhm.
um, black covers, gears. Ring a bell? Pragmatic
Yeah,
Programmer.
vaguely.
The Pragmatic Programmer had a
Okay.
volume for technical writers, urging tech
Yeah,
writers to keep their stuff in a repository for the same
right.
reason that developers keep stuff in a repository. Uh, Again, for perspective, Mark and I, and perhaps a couple of other hypertext people, are about to embark on a wildly experimental project for a new tinderbox view, which may come to nothing. So we don't want to have this on the main tinderbox because we don't want to confuse everybody and have clutter up your menus with a crash program, a crashing thing that never does any good. Yet we still want to be able to do tinderbox development while this is underway. And Git does provide a nice disciplined way to say, this is mainstream tinderbox, this is weird tinderbox. Uh, you're in one side or the other of the looking glass. And if you need a third side of the looking glass, it'll do it. And
One of the most interesting ways that people who do DevOps use source control systems that seems to be not as well popularized as it should be is that if you take all the config files that exist within, let's say, a Linux system, and there's generally a tree structure and allow you to get to all those files pretty easily, and you put that into a source control repository, then whenever any one person changes a config anywhere in that system, you have a track of it. You know when it occurred, you probably know who did it, and you know how to back it out. And that is the way that, today's incredibly complicated data centers and virtualized environments and containerized systems almost have to work, or people would just lose their minds trying to keep track of everything. But yet my suspicion, having spent the last month debugging some incredibly complex problems with VMware and Windows and internet working, all combining to create unbelievable problems, is that stuff, that kind of approach is not used in a disciplined manner as much as it should be, because you start finding all kinds of loose ends as you start having to dig in to fix serious problems. So, there's a lot of power in source control repositories, and I think partly because they've been so focused on the developer, a lot of other uses have not become as popular as they probably should be.
well, and for a long time, files were not necessarily aware that they were all text.
Mhm.
And the formalism of version control systems is very focused on text, and it assumes that what you're working with in text. And so all the doc says, of course it's text. What else would someone write? Uh, but now we kind of understand that it's all text all the way down. Everything is a text. And it's possible to design more text-like representations of things like images, where things that are actually meaningful edits look like meaningful edits and are localized. And you can say, yes, someone edited this image, rather than, oh, they replaced the image wholesale with a different image. It may matter to you.
Oh, I see. Something unrelated. If anybody wants to pick up a copy of Keyboard Maestro, there's a beautiful Black Friday sale going on and a whole bunch of unclutter apps. I'm going to just share the link. I picked out 3, 4 apps just that, I hadn't done. I have no affiliation.
Thank you, by the way, Mark, for running your annual Black Friday sale. Took advantage of it.
Very good.
It reminds me I need to renew as well.
Terrific. Do we have anything else this week?
Not offhand. I think Mark and Michael and myself are probably going to get together and do some sideline stock tracking app stuff. And then I think a couple more people are interested. So maybe we'll make a little working group out of it.
Excellent.
I might have something interesting. Something I've been discussing actually on the backstage, but the irony. So a colleague of mine who's, should we say, something of an AI booster, can't see anything with AI on the button without pressing it, had produced this enormous summary of about a year's worth of recordings. So these are recordings we've done over a year of a project, 2 or 3 times a week. They've been transcribed and then has done an AI sort of extraction. Unfortunately, using a slightly changing prompt all the time. So it's all roughly the same, but different. With the result that it's, I don't know, 9,000 lines of text, which clearly no one's going to read except possibly putting it into another AI to see. And I thought, okay, what I'll do is I'll deconstruct this. So I put in BBEdit. So took the stuff out, all the style text, cleaned out all the typesetting cruft, put it back into plain text. Set it up and did it at this stage a 2-stage explode because there's per meeting and there's items, because it does some quite interesting things like saying what were the agreements and disagreements, but in the way that generative text tends to make things quite bland. I thought it would just be useful to get something like Tinderbox to find amidst all this morass, just to list all the things, week by week, to do things like, well, are we still arguing about the same things a year on or not? Because I don't really know. I have a sense we are. But interestingly, that's something the AI can't do. So I'm now using what I call HI, human intelligence, to actually sort out the AI. We'll see how it goes. And if there's anything interesting, I'll sort of share back with people. Because the work that's being done is essentially all open anyway, so there's no problem about it being proprietary.
I was just thinking, looking at this, the poster example file, and over the last few years, I've collected quite a stack of beautiful example and tester files. And we do have a section on the forum, right, that's dedicated to example files, but I'm not sure if any of us are actually putting stuff in there and updating it. I wonder also if the structure doesn't actually allow for easy sort of, pulling off. If there's a way, maybe we can get like a table and we can go, okay, posters and these are the good example files.
Well, in the way that Michael Becker has a note in the video file that indexes the videos, it would be a good thing, but not for me, to pull out at least the more notable demos and have a sticky note at the top with some of the more notable demos. That would be a great thing to do.
But it is
I think
funny.
you did set up a separate. I think you did set up a separate chat or area for talking about posters, though, on the forum.
Well, certainly you could do that. I mean, I do know
Yeah.
from the demo set that I ran around the time of version 5, the thing that actually surprised me is just how quickly they get outdated. So, for instance, to go to 5 to 6, every single window opened up as a new document window. So there's quite a lot of rewriting, and then you find that it's really quite subtle. That you'll find that actually there's been a new system attribute or a new something that actually doesn't invalidate what's there, but there's no way you go through all this trope of stuff one did before because there's now something that does it. So it's actually something of a labor of love. And I think I said in the forum to someone the other day, the best place to find good examples is probably example files that people have posted at the end of a thread quite recently, because
and gathering those would be a service too. Grab those example files, annotate them a little bit, and copy them into the tutorials and examples folder section and index them. And even if they do go out of date, often they're easy to fix if one thinks to do it. But we've got no really good mechanism for live demos that people care about, as opposed to demos from eons ago that there are now just better ways to do.
I mean, we need somebody whose private joy is actually writing out the demos, because my experience is that taking something that was in the thread, so everyone who's in the thread knows what's going on, and they just take the demo, they take the file and see what's there. Writing that to someone who's just come in a year later and read it and doesn't know the subject from Adam is sort of 95% more work, because you just start to think of all the implicit assumptions that were in the outer contexts, and it's difficult to hard do it, because my experience is if you lowball that process, all you get is someone saying this is a marvelous idea, but it's meaningless because I can't understand the instructions. And they're not being unkind; they're being quite honest. Yeah.
I was about to say, like, when people come in, and I've done it myself, you just initial understanding of Tinderbox and go, yeah, welcome to the forum, ask any question you want. And so you're going to ask the question, which means you don't have to go through reams and reams of posts and examples and then try to understand the logic and the thinking and the language behind it. So yeah, bit of a catch-22 there. And there are unlimited ways to do everything, so that makes it even more fun.
My reflection is that the thing to train oneself into doing is think of it in terms of the toolbox and say, well, instead of saying I want this outcome, and then basically looking constantly at the delta, how close are you to the outcome, which normally means that you get very close and then you just swim round and round, never getting any closer, is to actually say, well, okay, what are the bits? What gets me there? How is this constructed? Therefore, when I rummage around in the toolbox, I probably won't need the pliers this time around, but I'm probably going to need a Phillips screwdriver and a flathead. And just pick the pieces out, and then it ratchets yourself along, because it's very impressive actually how I think especially in the sort of last decade or so, that how the text tools have really grown out, allowing you to do some really interesting sort of analytical work in text, which for those who want to do it, there are a few things that do it as well. You could do it all down on the command line or something, but you're probably doing it that way either because or you're just a masochist. And if you do know, that's great, but not many of us do. So actually having something that puts that power within reach within a sort of UI and gives you the benefit of multiple ways to visualize it, which I think is another thing that's really overlooked. I mean, it's terribly easy to end up constantly in the same view and overlook the fact that actually the thing that you've just been laboring to do in view X is actually done for you in view Y if you did but know it. And sometimes, it's just a chance question in the forum that somebody said, you do know you could probably try this. But it's difficult, again, because until you have the experience of it, and it's not even as simple as just seeing it in a demo. Sometimes it is the act of actually just trying it out for the first time and you may not get what you want, but you get the epiphany that if next time around, but if you'd started from a slightly different place, you could definitely get more quickly to where you're going using a slightly different sort of subset of the tools.
It's a lot of like a treasure hunt because, even going around in circles and not coming to the solution, you pick up all these baubles and gems along the way, and which makes so much sense later on. Oh, yeah, I learned how to do this.
But stuff survives. I was reminded. I think it was Paul Walters. There are one or two indefatigable people who politely, constantly send me sort of out of date bits of ATBRF, and I realised there are all sorts of references. The thing I think posted the other day to main views, which haven't been in the app since 2013 or 2014 odd, but have just gently persisted. Of course, people obviously read that and thought that makes sense, but didn't know what it meant, or did and didn't think to mention it. But so and these things can all be purged or explained once found.
Yeah, you just mentioned on a post a few days back that there are 10 views, and it struck me like, yeah, wow, there are 10 views in Tinderbox. I mean, I use many of them much of the time, but you don't actually think about it.
I think definitely the one that's most interesting in a way, if you're using links, is potentially, and it's so if you structure your work to use it. For instance, if you type your links, or so in a sense, rather than thinking of link types as line labels. So if you use the map essentially like Omnigraphal or Visio or something, you draw a box and line, and you have a line and you give it a label because it's useful to know what the line means, which is still a link type, but there's no reason you can't have link types where you're essentially being more explicit and expressive as to what the relationship between the things is. And it's absolutely the case that you can turn individual link types off, the visibility on and off per link type. So you could have a whole skein of links that in, say, in a map are invisible because you don't want to see them because they're not there to provide a sort of visual element. But you could be using them, say, in hyperbolic view to give yourself an incredibly rich picture of the interrelation between all the parts. Plus the fact that the hyperbolic view will go across the piece because it's working across the link network rather than across a particular container as a map perforce must do.
Oh, this is interesting because I'm just putting together a new project. And in fact, I've started out by just keeping it completely flat. Everything is in a container called container. And I'm using attributes and maps. And I was wondering if I should go down the link pathway on this because I do want the ability to grasp everything in one shot. But then I could probably use links as links as containers paradigm and work accordingly and see. And then also Gaudi view would be useful for that, right?
Yes, and also consider if you're doing some work that's starting out as sort of exploratory, where the sort of visual hypertext element of a map is extremely powerful because you may not even use links because, once you put a line between two things, they're somehow more special than all the rest. But if you're just doing that loose association, but as you get to the point where you may want to make a report, even if it's only internally within the document, but you basically are creating a narrative out of it, you probably are going to want to use something like the outline. And if you bear that in mind, you may be able to basically think ahead and put links in place such that you can still walk around your map via the hyperbolic view, although the original map is now decomposed into a nested outline.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, actually, that reminds me. So I had this odd behavior. I mean, it's in design. I'm just trying to figure out how it works. So I created a link a while back, and then I assigned a URL to it. So that was like a URL link. Subsequently, every time I created a link, it defaulted to that particular type of link, not an untitled link. I'm assuming it's sort of designed that way so that once you start using links, it will use the last used one. And okay, and then but it persisted a couple of times, even though I sort of went and selected untitled, and then the next time I created a link, it still gave me the default, the one I had created. So I'll keep an eye. Okay, so it's supposed to change, right? When it does, okay, I'll bear that in mind.
And one thing to do is if you want to, what you can always do is to sort of purge the system, or to, is to build another link deliberately that you don't really care about, give it the type that you want to be, in a sense, the resting thing, and then you can
Got it.
delete the note you've made. The link will go with it, but put the resting state as the last remembered type of link type. The rationale for it is quite sensible, because if you say you're at a meeting or an exhibition or conference or something, you're doing fast note taking, it is quite useful if you say are note taking into a map, that
Oh, for
it's
sure.
highly likely that the sort of, especially if you say you're using argumentation type links, that the type that you just use is probably the best guess for the type that you want for the next link.
Oh, totally. Even if I'm like re-looking at something, I go, no, I'm going to do all the whatever, um, X type of links, Y type of links, and then at a time you sort of parse through. And actually, another random question I had. Somebody mentioned something about aligning notes in the map view, either in the last meetup or somewhere. And I think I remember someone saying that. So if you've got a note and you create another note and you want it to align to that note, it helps to touch the first note and then you move the next note. Does that help
I
to
think that was,
align it to?
there was a point, someone asked about grid. Snap to grid was the start of the
Yeah.
question. And it sort of segued into alignment. If you basically have, say, 3 notes for sake of example, and you want to align them all, the thing to do is to select first. The first thing you select is essentially the anchor for that. So if you're saying align with top, they'll all use the top of the first notes item as the reference point. Now, if you've got a selection of things and you're, say, trying to align them on a number of different axes, it may be the case that you actually then want to reselect them in a different order to make sure that essentially the one that is providing the starting reference for that alignment. So then, if you're aligning to top or you're aligning to left, whatever, then that will work. Was that the thing that you probably tripped over the other day?
No, actually, all I'm trying to do. So, for example, I may have 7 or 8 notes already in a loose grid formation, and then I've added a 9th note, and I'm trying to now align the note. I'm a little bit too zoomed out, so when I try to align it, it sort of, it moves to somewhere else. So, how am I to tell that particular note? Oh no, I need you to align up to these existing eight notes already, or loosely. So I was wondering if I can like touch one of the other notes so that this 9th note knows sort of where to place itself in the grid.
I think
So not actually using a line
no,
as a feature.
I know what you're getting at there. So when you see the kibitzes, the little blue lines coming on and off,
Yeah.
Tinderbox, there's a bit of spatial parsing going, and Tinderbox is having to do some work to figure out, well, which thing are you really looking at? Now, the reality is, in our mind's eye, we're not looking at the closest thing. We're looking at the thing just beyond it, because to us, that's the obvious reference point. So in that context, if it's a form of alignment that is represented on the align menu, and which probably covers quite a lot of cases, then the answer is look at the distant object, select that, then select the thing you want, forget all the other ones in between and do the alignment. And then because then essentially you're saying, I want this in relation to that.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'll see as you move around on the map, you'll see the little sort of blue hints come up, and that's giving you an indication as to what the application thinks you're trying to do. But what it's
Aligning
hard
to
for it
that,
to
right?
do is to know that your point of reference is not actually one of the most sort of immediately closest items.
Oh, absolutely. And then, of course, there's overlap and there's alignment adornments and stuff. But okay, I'm just so that I know now that there is something going on. And that's actually really beautiful and elegant for me. I didn't know it all this time, so I will use it more.
So, Mark, was that a fair description of how the alignment works?
Yeah. The specific problem was that the original poster wanted to line the tops and bottoms, and instead it looked like it was deciding either the golden ratio or the same size with the partly visible node above was taking precedence. And when that happens, if that's not what you wanted, just hold down, I guess it's the shift key or the option key. I've forgotten which offhand, but you can look at the menu and it'll tell you. And manually reposition and it'll be okay.
My recollection is shift anchors, as is common in some other apps. If you're dragging, shift will anchor you to basically an up, down, or left, right. So it'll anchor you onto the X or Y axis in terms of the drag.
For drag.
An option would clone the node, right? Generally.
Yes. Or Command D will duplicate it, which gets you to the same point. And then Option L gives you an alias, if that's what you want.
Or of course,
Now that I know
don't
it.
do this, but turning off guides will also, and that's a toggle. I think it has a shortcut. And
Yeah, I'm using shift and it's beautiful how it works. And also like now touching and aligning. Now that I know that it's a design feature, it's like making my life so much easier in laying out my little boxes.
where it really helps, I find I'm doing a lot of note taking in libraries and on the fly, where I really don't care about how things look, and I force myself not to care because I'm there to look stuff up, not to futz with the tinderbox map aesthetics. Yet, the kibitzers do manage to keep things in lines and keeps the spacing fairly regular, and that's kind of nice. It's sometimes impressive how unmessy it makes things when I'm really in a mode where I'm not trying to be neat at all.
Yeah, it does have some like a very organic element to it, as opposed to say working in something like Photoshop, Illustrator, or mapping apps.
Yeah, great. Well, I think we're at the end of another week's meetup. With luck, it may take 2 weeks because there are a bunch of deadlines this week, but I'm going to rework Readwise sometime in the near future. And this time it should be easier to follow. And we should find some good speakers for the new year. Thanks, everybody, and see you next Saturday.
Yep. Have a
Thank
great
you.
week.
Bye.
Bye bye.